I've got a lot of respect for anyone who has the balls to jump into a saturated field and try their hand at making something new. In gaming, if you're an indie studio putting out a retro-inspired RPG, I mean, that's a pretty tall order if you want to stand out. You've probably heard of Stardew Valley and all the cozy games like it that came out afterward, right? Let's just call them what they are. They're copycat titles, and most of them don't do anything different or innovative. So anytime I see a game with a retro vibe come out that has anything to do with cooking or a fishing mechanic or any kind of building, well, I'm skeptical to say the least. Now with all that said, I recently played an indie RPG that basically brands itself as cozy right out of the gate, and it's got cooking and even a little building. But it's still actually a solid play with a good story and a great soundtrack. I know that's kind of hard to believe, trust me, but stick with me through the end of the video and I'll show you why I think this one might actually be worth a play. Terra Memoria was developed by La Moutarde Studios and was released on Steam, Xbox, PlayStation, and the Nintendo Switch in March of this year. Now I know I mentioned Stardew Valley before, but really this game isn't all that much like Stardew, so don't worry. Though it does share a couple similarities. The developers actually took their inspiration from Breath of Fire 3, which is a pretty damn good game, so not a bad start. Terra Memoria also has a similar 3D meets 2D graphics thing going on, and while its approach to skill building, battles, and storytelling are unique, it doesn't feel totally unfamiliar. They really nailed the nostalgia feeling while keeping it fresh, and you get that feeling as soon as you start the game. We'll touch on the gameplay and the music in a bit, but the main thing that got me into this game was the story, which is a lot more detailed than you'd probably expect. And like a lot of the RPGs I've enjoyed over the years, it's got a strong allegorical tie to real life. In short, and I mean very short, the world we're in here is called Terra, and it's one where many powerful forces coexist at once, primarily magic and crystals. Now magic, we know, it's a tried and true storytelling mechanic in RPGs, and in this game it's an organic force, but one which is falling out of favor in lieu of crystals. Now these crystals are a finite resource, and they power just about everything in the modern world remotely related to technology. They're relatively new though, are in high demand, and recently have become suspiciously short in supply. In fact, the whole overarching theme in this game is you're supposed to find out why the crystals are becoming so scarce. There has to be a reason behind it, and you and your party end up being the ones who need to get to the bottom of the whole thing. In the process, you discover some long-forgotten technology, meet some really interesting characters, reveal several layers of conspiracy, and even play a part in the rekindling of ancient ways. It's pretty rich all in all, and the characters have a lot to do with that. For main characters, there's Moshang, a constant mage from the Murky race, which, by appearances at least, is a race of super-jacked rhinoceros people with impressive Viking beards. He's fresh out of the Mage Academy, and the first character we meet. His people in the city of Constance still use magic, though crystals, like everywhere, are quickly taking over as the power du jour. Next up is Syl, a Karsak summoning mage newly out of school herself. She's traveling in search of her missing parents, as well as a lost companion spirit her people pass down like heirlooms from generation to generation. Hers seems to have abandoned her, which is a whole thing. You'll quickly run into Alto, a musician of the Falavora race who joins your group without a lot of fuss. He's basically a hippie sloth, and he more or less just seems to dig your vibe. There's also Edson, who's got a pretty intense backstory, but technology is his thing, and since he needs crystal to power his arms and legs, well, the kid's motivated. A bit later on, there's Opal, a local blacksmith who specializes in pin creation. Now, pins are something we'll get into later, but she's an interesting character because not only is she super strong, but that strength seems to come from her anthropomorphized hammer, who's really the embodiment of a great warrior. It's kind of a long story, I'll admit, but it's a good one. For me personally, the most interesting character is Meta. And that's partly because, at least at the outset, she doesn't really know who she is. And she can somehow mimic almost anything at will, and likes how friendly you and your friends are to her, which is apparently enough motivation to join your party, but the way her story plays out is really interesting. Now, since this game is still fairly new, I don't want to ruin anything like I typically do with my reviews of older games. So for the sake of leaving something to discover, I'll just say that there's a lot more to this story as you continue your investigation into why the crystals have become scarce. Now I mentioned that this game shares a few elements from other games, and most of them are pretty well done. Not everything was though, which I'll touch on in a second. But I did really enjoy the battle mechanics in Terra Memoria. First off, like I said, the game is low impact, and that's backed up by the fact that your party gets a full heal after every single battle, and the battles aren't random. Your party's attacks are all magic based, and are elemental or healing in nature, and there isn't any MP to speak of. Rather, your ability to attack is based on timing. Basically, each time you attack, you're accepting how many turns you have to wait before you can attack again. again. The timing itself is laid out on the bottom of the battle screen, and each member of your party or the enemy's party is indicated in order, which means you know what's coming next most of the time. And that wait time changes based on the intensity of the attack. Some are single enemy and some are AoE. You choose what you go with based on your strategy. Where the battle mechanics get really interesting is with the companions. See, Moshang, Syl, and Meta are the three main characters, and they're present on the battlefield. But Alto, Edson, and Opal are all supporting characters. Who partners with which of your main characters in a battle is random, but each supporting character adds a different spin on your abilities. So here's the breakdown. Alto transforms attacks into heals and heals into attacks. That's handy, because not every character has every option in each battle. Since not everyone has a healing option in every fight, having Alto join your character opens that up. Edson transforms regular skills into multi-target skills and vice versa, which is also handy because though AoE attacks are less powerful, it's still useful to be able to hit everyone sometimes. The same goes for healing actions. There are moments where it's nice to be able to mass heal. Opal's ability is what I found most useful because she transforms the elements of some skills. See, the elements she offers can change every turn, but since your attack options are limited to 3 choices per character every battle, it's nice to be able to switch things around as you need. That's also helpful because every enemy has an indicator next to their stats that shows what they're weak to. Sometimes one thing, sometimes more than one thing, but if you hit them with something they're weak to, it opens them up completely and they become weak to everything. Very, very handy when you plan it right. One other great thing the devs added to Terra Memoria in battles is the ability to speed up time with a button. Since there are animations to each move and some of those can take some time, being able to whip through encounters when you're used to the flow keeps the pace of play quick, which I appreciated. Rather than save points, you save the game's progress continually as the game goes on, which is nice. But when you want to improve your skills and level up, you need to either find a campfire, there are a few around, or you need to visit an inn. Either way, you're setting up for the night, and all the experience you collected since your last one are added up then. That's kind of a twist, because you'll often end up going up like 10 or 12 levels all at once, but you don't improve in between those moments. In terms of improving your stats, you also have an option to cook. And cooking is sort of a minigame with a timing element, which I personally didn't feel needed to be included, and you have to buy ingredients to do the cooking first anyhow. When you do get stat boosts from this cooking though, they're permanent, which is kind of an interesting twist on its own. There are other stat boosts you can get from things called pins, which take the place of weapons and armor you see in most RPGs. Each main character has 3 pin spots, and you can either collect or craft your own pins, each of which have specific stat boosts. Some stats can also go down while others go up, so it's a good idea to look closely at the combos you pick. Crafting pins is also another thing you do when you make camp, and you craft based on the materials you collect from enemies during battle. You can also craft at forges you'll find in certain places along the way, and any pins you craft can also be sold to merchants for extra money. I mentioned your main character's skills are limited, but you do learn new ones as you go along, just in a different way than usual. Rather than getting new skills as you level up, you encounter different areas specific to each of the characters on the world map and solve puzzles or face battles to learn new attacks. Now, these puzzles can be fairly complex and the battles can be challenging, which I think adds a really unique, if unconventional, element to the gameplay. I should mention there's also a building element to this game, which again, I personally didn't think needed to be included and it felt a little forced, but it was kind of fun once I got into it. And this happens at a place called Begin, pun intended I think, which I won't spoil, but you have the option somewhere around the halfway point in the game to spend some time there. You have the ability to build all kinds of structures and decorations, paths, and other kinds of things here, and you also purchase plans for more to build all across Terra. Honestly, I didn't do much of this though. I don't usually get too into the building of things in games unless there's a measurable need, and I didn't see that in Terra Memoria. All in all, I thought the gameplay was pretty decent in this game, but what balanced out the newer things like that cooking element or some of the building were the retro-inspired graphics and a really good soundtrack. The graphics in Terra Memoria are, simply put, cozy. The developers mentioned that they were inspired by Breath of Fire 3, and that shows in how the 3D elements of the game areas are designed right alongside the 2D character sprites. And really, sprites is a term I would use loosely here. It's not like the character design was lacking. Really, the vibe I got more than anything was retro with a modern twist, and I think that's a nice take on a game like this. Aside from the graphics used in the cooking minigame, everything has a certain flow to it. It does feel cohesive. Also, each town and main area you go through is really thoughtfully designed, and each area is also massive in comparison to what you get in a lot of other RPGs. That's not always a good thing, since you can get lost at times trying to find your way. It happened to me, but it shows that a lot of work was put into making the world feel rich and realistic. Taking the time to design townspeople who you can't interact with but aren't just carbon copies of each other is a pretty nice touch, I gotta give them that. The battle graphics weren't skipped on either. The backgrounds are detailed, the colors are bright, and they're varied for each area, which I know a lot of other RPGs do, but it was nice to see here. Honestly, a lot of the indie RPGs I've played seem to do the bare minimum with the battles. As you can see from the mechanics to the design in this game, that isn't the case. The same goes for the enemies in each battle. They're not just reused over and over, and I know that happens all the time in RPGs, so extra credit. I also really enjoyed the soundtrack to this game. Obviously, as a retro game fan, I love the old soundtracks in classic RPGs. They're fantastic and really well made given the technology available. But with a modern game, we have modern luxuries, and Terra Memoria took full advantage of that. Not only are there not repetitive and bland battle songs heard over and over, but there are moods and instruments set in each location to match the environment. The tempo rises when the action happens, and it slows down when things calm down. I guess the best thing I can say about the soundtrack is it wasn't noticeable until I wanted to notice it, and when I did, I was glad for it. So many games these days have had good soundtracks, but indie games, and especially indie RPG games, are generally lacking in that department. Because the graphics and the music match the overall cozy vibe of this game, but didn't detract from the gameplay and the story, I think it was a perfect compliment. I'll say clearly that I don't think this game is for everyone. Anybody like me who loves older RPGs will definitely find elements of Terra Memoria to enjoy, I have no doubt about that. But the edge is definitely taken off of this game in a way that might irk someone looking for a serious challenge. For anyone who's new to RPGs though, this is a great way to try the genre without committing to like 100 hours. With all this said, I think the folks at La Moutarde made a really strong effort here, and this game's entirely worth the playthrough. It's cozy, sure, but really, is that such a bad thing? There's a great story, a really good soundtrack, and some unique gameplay elements I haven't seen before. I recommend giving this one a go, and considering the courage it takes to put yourself out there in a crowded marketplace, I think it's worth picking this title up just to celebrate that kind of bravery. I'm glad I did, and I'm looking forward to what they put out next. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.